Now, welcome to another lightning response video, and we're going to kind of keep the prequel theme we've had going on in the last few of these with this comment from exec050 who asked, "Hey Thor, I believe the sequels happened the way they did because Disney did the opposite of what George Lucas did with his two trilogies. He created the movies he wanted without worrying too much about the fans. I believe Disney failed because they worried too much about the fans and making money, so they followed the fans that, like my coworker says, the prequels aren't real Star Wars, only the original movie is. I think too many people trashed the prequels, leaving us with terrible recreations of the original trilogy. I like to hope that this new Rey-based movie they've announced is Disney committing to their decisions instead of trying to milk money just by following fans' opinions. In this way, I've found hope that this Rey movie could be good. Thoughts about this?" Okay, so let's pull this question or questions apart piece by piece and start with what I think is the big one. Did reaction or perceived reaction to the prequels impact how the sequel trilogy was made or how it turned out? Or mainly how The Force Awakens was made, since many say The Last Jedi was what it was because of reaction to The Force Awakens, that it was an overcorrection, which we'll discuss that in this video as well and get that story kind of straight. And I say perceived reaction to the prequels because even though, yes, plenty of fans did not like those films and have said as much in numerous ways, including making movies, making songs, to long format videos here on YouTube, breaking it all down. But despite all that, it's the media that tends to set and control the narrative on these things, especially with the more general public or casual fans who don't know any of that aforementioned stuff even exists. And the media certainly was hard on those films. They were hard on the prequels and made it sound like everyone hated them, which has become the common held belief by most people. And again, I'm talking more along the lines of non-Star Wars fans or the very casual ones who just watch the movies once and don't think about them ever again. Most of those people tend to think everyone, all the fans, hate the prequels because that's what they've always been told or what they've always heard. The same way the media, has tried to control the narrative around the sequel trilogy, tried to claim it is only a small, angry minority of bigots who didn't like those films for very terrible reasons. Whereas the truth in both cases, or the breakdowns or percentages of how many fans like them versus don't like them, again with both sequels and prequels, it is very difficult to ever figure out or discern. And in both cases, a lot of people likely fall somewhere between the two extremes and either don't really hate them or don't really love them, they're just kind of there. Anyway, to get back on point here, though we have no concrete proof that the prequels impacted how The Force Awakens was made, the fact that in the lead up to that film so much emphasis was put on the return to practical effects, and the fact that, just the feel of the film seemed to harken back to A New Hope, plus there are virtually no prequel references in that film other than about a clone army at one point. Well, put that all together and it does very much seem like or feel like they were trying to make something not like the prequels or the opposite of them. That in their mind, or they were trying to sell to the, again, more casual fans who make up the bulk of the audience, that they were going back to quote-unquote real Star Wars where everything is really there and made like it was in the original trilogy. Which is kind of hilarious because the sequels actually had more digital effects than the prequels did. They just had improved over the last 15 years or so, go figure, since those films, the prequels were kind of the pioneers of the all-digital CGI-heavy movie era, if you will. And that technology has been, well, not perfected, but certainly improved in that time, and it doesn't quite stand out as much as it did back in the day. Along these same lines, this strange assumption out there that nearly everything in the prequels is CGI is complete and total BS. A lot of actual sets and miniature models were used and used in conjunction with CGI. The arena on Geonosis, for example, was a miniature model. Though that said, sure, there was a lot of CGI in the prequels, and some of it looks, shall we say, rather dated, with the battle between the Gungans and battle droids on Naboo being one that really stands out as something that doesn't look so good by today's standards. So yes, I do think The Force Awakens in part ended up being what it was because Disney wanted to distance themselves from the Star Wars prequel era that, again, nobody apparently liked. Which is kind of ironic because for some, how much they disliked the sequels made them re-examine and maybe have a new appreciation for the prequels. I do think, in part, the recent rise in popularity of the prequels is attributed to that, though it's also the kids of that generation growing up and getting a louder voice in the fandom, and the fact that, no, not everyone who grew up with the original trilogy hates the prequels. That's just the narrative so many have come to believe because we've heard it over and over and over again. That then takes us to the claim that The Last Jedi is a reaction, or as I said before, an overcorrection, to so many people calling The Force Awakens too much nostalgia and nothing new. Problem with that is Rian Johnson wrote the first draft of The Last Jedi in July of 2014, over a year before The Force Awakens even came out. He even asked J.J. Abrams to make changes to his film to align with his plans for his movie, including changing the end of the film. As you may have heard, originally Rey was going to find Luke Skywalker meditating with rocks floating around him, but that was scrapped in favor of the ending we did get. Johnson would then go on to complete 3 more drafts of the script before the release of The Force Awakens, meaning none of them could have in any way been impacted by the reaction to that film. Though that said, a first shooting script for The Last Jedi was completed in February of 2016, which would be a month or 2 after the release of The Force Awakens, which means, yes, it could in theory have changes brought about by the reaction to The Force Awakens. Problem with that is we've heard Ram Bergman, who is a Last Jedi producer and friend of Rian Johnson, he has said that 90% of that original first draft was kept to the very end. Meaning from the actual information we have, no, The Last Jedi was not in response to The Force Awakens. It is simply the movie Rian Johnson always intended it to be, which makes sense given how much more recently he's talked about how little he cared about what came before or what would come after, that he wanted to tell his own complete story with his film. As for the last part of this comment or question about maybe the Rey movie being Disney and Lucasfilm just doing what they want or not worrying so much about the fans, well, just the fact that they're embracing her and the sequels after, yes, quite a bit of backlash towards her in those films, it shows that they're at least not listening to some of the fans, those who wanted to see that all retconned and done away with. And again, we can argue and debate all day about percentages about how many fans like those films compared to not like those films, but maybe the most telling data that we actually have that is concrete and we can look at comes in the form of the box office numbers. And we can see that the revenue for The Force Awakens was cut in half by the time The Rise of Skywalker came out, which tends to imply not as much interest in that trilogy as time went on. So, in a way, for better or worse, it does feel like they're embracing the Lucas approach and just telling the stories they want to tell, and that's that. In fact, I've been talking a lot lately about them potentially making some pretty big changes to the franchise by changing the Jedi to some degree. I do not think it's a coincidence that they're making a movie that will deal with the first Jedi and also making a movie about Rey making a new Jedi Order based on the teachings or books of those first Jedi. That seems like a connection that will allow them to, as I've guessed or speculated, make the Jedi a little more exciting, shall we say. Not that I think the Jedi are boring by any stretch personally, but perhaps they feel in this day and age of superhero movies that they need to lean a bit closer to that and further from what Lucas originally intended them to be. Though, I suppose only time will tell on all of that. Well, that's all I've got for you this time. Now it's your turn to take to the comments below and tell me what you think of any and all of this. Or feel free to ask a question for a future lightning response video by starting your comment off with "Hey Thor" to grab my attention. And a big thank you to everyone who has been leaving questions, which is a lot of you, which means obviously I can't get to all of them. Though I have considered doing a video where I try to quickly, in true lightning response fashion, answer a bunch of them all at once or all in one video. Maybe a new take on my Let's Talk Some Star Wars series of videos. And speaking of that, now's when I ask you to indeed take to the comments below so we can talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.